Bob, I want to talk about the way the Second Vatican Council will shape the next 25 years of the life of the Catholic Church. We've celebrated the 25th anniversary of the end of the Council, and we are now in the process of gearing ourselves up for the next 25 years, and it's of interest to me the way the Council documents can help us to do that. I want to focus on the document on Ecumenism, one of the important documents of the 16 produced by the Council Fathers. Again, in my mind, it's a question of how that document can spur us into the future and how it can help us to do a better job of living out the mandate of Christ, who said that he called us all to be one, that there's to be one flock and one shepherd, and something that we haven't done well with. So I suppose what has happened in the 20th century leading up to the Council is we became more aware of the sinful character of our divisions, the scandal that it produces, that it renders us less effective in spreading the gospel in the world when Christians are not united. And so once we became more aware of that, that spawned what we've come to know as the ecumenical movement, the drive for unity that really was highlighted by the Second Vatican Council. In fact, when Pope John the 23rd called the Council, the unity of Christians was one of the reasons that he had in mind, and so stated. And so that is an important document in the light of his vision for the Council.
And I think his vision was somehow encapsulated in the almost in the opening parts of this document on ecumenism, when the Council Father said, if we're really going to make a difference and open an approach to our brothers and sisters who share Christianity with us, we better take a hard look at ourselves and make sure that what we are doing is good and in imitation of the Lord Jesus and what's been handed down to us. And so it was the first step called for introspection. And I think that kind of captured the spirit of John when he said, if we're going to have Christian unity, we better take a look at ourselves and each other and see the Christness that is there or perhaps is absent, and make sure that it becomes apparent.
You've picked out Pope John the 23rd there, and you can't think about the Second Vatican Council nor our impetus into the future without giving him a major role. I mean, we're dealing with one of the great geniuses of modern times, in my opinion, and a man who came up through the ranks in the church and served, in the ordinary governance of the church as Patriarch of Venice and other places and so on, and then becomes Pope at a rather elderly age and decides to call this council. I mean, and to bring on a new Pentecost, as he said, to open up the windows, to bring reform and to move towards unity. I mean, it was a marvelous, grand vision. Sometimes I'd like to communicate some of that to the younger people who were really not born when the council happened, and the thrill and excitement that we had, and how that much of that really was personified by Pope John the 23rd, this open man, this man who lived out an ecumenical spirit. I mean, he was tolerant. I'm Joseph, your brother. Wasn't that one of the lines he used at the
Jewish
beginning?
Community.
Yes, right. And to say that, hey, I'm here with you. So there was a general openness and tolerance about the man, and that got reflected in his policies and eventually worked its way into the council document
itself. Well, I think that his own background, where he had been, yes, in the bureaucracy of the church, but had been out with the people in Paris as nuncio there, but in Bulgaria, where he was not surrounded primarily by Roman Catholics. Mm-hmm. And that experience and the experience of the war and many of the things he did, frankly, faking baptismal certificates for Jews so that they could be free of the Nazi problems during the war. This was a man who was providential in my mind.
Yes, just a wonderful, marvelous man, and everything about his personality and character fit that time, and the need then for this new openness, open the window within the Catholic Church. One of the things that he did, even before the council started, was he began the Secretariat for Promoting Christian Unity. He did that already in 1960. The council didn't start till 62. And they are the ones who drafted this document, and I think that's worth pointing out here. Most of the documents, as they came to the Council Fathers in 1962, were drafted by the Roman Curia, the official bureaucracy in Rome, that was rather entrenched. Well, this document was produced by a new commission, And as I remember, it was headed by Cardinal Bea, who was himself very wide-open man, tolerant, had more experience in dialoguing with non-Christians and with separated Christians. And so that document from the word go had another tone to it. It was less defensive, less strident, less tied to the traditional scholastic language that the Roman Curia was used to using. And so I think that's probably reflected in the final draft that we have among these 16 documents, too. This more open and tolerant spirit pervades it.
Again, I think it was Bea's contact with other Christians, particularly in his biblical studies, because that's where he was primarily noted as a biblical scholar, that enabled him to both give the impetus to biblical studies long before Vatican Council II through Pius XII, and then have this marvelous willingness and credibility among other Christians to be the one to be the focus of the ecumenical movement, or the Promoting Christian Unity Commission. And yeah, that kind of attitude just brought a whole new approach to a document that might otherwise have been, as you suggested, rather...
it could have been very rigid and turned off the other Christians. There's an interesting phrase in there, I think it's in number 7, if I'm remembering correctly, that calls for a change of heart. That says that if you're going to have an ecumenical movement, we need conversion. We need a turnaround within our own hearts. In other words, if we're going to get back to the gospel, if we're going to get Christian groups together, it's going to be through getting back to the gospel, through fidelity to Christ, through the conversion process. It isn't because we will convince the other group that we're right, or force them to think our way, or, on the other hand, just water down our own doctrine or our own approach so that we can all get united. That was a leveling kind of ecumenism that the council rejected. Instead, it seemed to me, the essence of what they were about was fidelity to the gospel. The more all Christian groups get back to the true teaching of Jesus and are faithful to the Lord, the more we will appear to come together. The more in actuality we will be closer together. And I think that became the key to how this ecumenical movement would move forward.
I think, there are two thoughts that come to my mind. Is that one is, I think, probably my favorite phrase as translated in the English of the documents. And both of these were caveats, things to beware of, as we moved into this stage of ecumenical interaction and cooperation. The first was to beware of a false Irenicism, which simply means false peace.
Yes.
That, to pretend like, well, there are no differences between us. No, there are differences. That is why we are divided. And what the document, I think, is calling for is, let us take an honest look at those differences, but first that honest change of heart that you were speaking of, to say, are we just defending turf, defending a practice, defending an opposite position that has come particularly as a result of the Protestant Reformation? Or are we really in conformity with Christ? So that was the first of the caveats, or the
false Irenicism, yeah,
false peace that like it didn't. And the second was, as you said, a watering down that came out as, well, it really doesn't make any difference. We're all worshiping the same God, and it's all, we're all together, so it doesn't make any difference. Yeah, it does. It does make a difference. And we need to be able to articulate our respective positions with respective listening to the positions of others, and then evaluating that in the light of the gospel. That has to be the hallmark. That has to be the benchmark that says, yes, this is worth preserving, and I can make adaptations, and hopefully you can as well.
Bob, in the substance of the document, they really take up the two great splits in the Christian world, and it's worth recalling that, I think. The first great split is finalized in 1054. That is the split between the Eastern and the Western churches. And that is a split that really has a long history. As Yves Congar, the great theologian of ecumenism, and probably one of our best ecumenical theologians ever, said that from the very beginning of Christianity there was already a split between East and West. In other words, right from after the time of Christ, the way Christianity was lived out in the Western world and in the Eastern world had its differences. It took different forms of liturgy, different ways of governance, and so on, different spiritualities, different notions of grace even. most fundamental kind of ideas. Different models of Christ took over. So what you really had was a difference from the very beginning in Eastern and Western styles of Christianity. And of course, then because of economic questions and political questions and so on, that split began to get intensified. And what happened in 1054 was the last effort to achieve unity was aborted, and we had the mutual excommunications. The Pope's legate excommunicated the Eastern Patriarch, and in turn he excommunicated the West. And so we had this horrible split between what we now know as the Roman Catholic world and the Orthodox world. And that has continued to our own time. And we have only become, I suppose, more familiar with that in the recent past with the opening of the Russian Church again, and a greater dialogue with that particular brand of Orthodox Christianity. So, in learning maybe more about their distinctive spirituality, which is indeed a rich one and powerful and very helpful to us. And I think the document gives us a sense of that, hey, we can learn from this. There's something good and powerful in this Orthodox world.
Yeah, it was exactly that very thing, though, that you mentioned, that what was true, in fact, that there was this cultural split that existed from the very beginning. But to my mind, the beauty and the genius was that it was allowed to coexist and interfertilize. Cross-cultural fertilization of the richness of the Eastern communities, the Eastern approach to Christianity that the Western Church didn't have, and vice versa.
Congar says that's one of the great tragedies of the split, is that the dialogue stopped, and therefore, as you said, the enrichment was really truncated in many ways. And which is a shame. Now, when we start projecting into the next 25 years where this document is going to take us, I believe that one of the great new dialogues will be between the West and the East, and it's going to be important in terms of geopolitical reasons, too. I mean, the end of the Cold War is going to facilitate that, I believe, and greater dialogue with the Russian Orthodox churches, and a greater appreciation of the national differences within Orthodoxy. So we had Greek Orthodox and different countries. We even have a Ukrainian Orthodox, for example, that would be different from the Russian Orthodox. So all of that will become clearer to us, and then we'll be able to draw on some of the riches, the icons, for example, and their great notion of grace. Already that's happened. A lot of the ways that Western Catholics and just ordinary people in the pew these days understand grace is really due to the Eastern Fathers, because Rahner recovered that notion of grace as divinization, of changing us, that we are really images of God, and the sparks of the deity are inside of us, and grace isn't a thing, but it is God's self-communication to us. All these things, I think, that are somewhat common now among our educated people, at least, we borrowed from the Eastern world. It was a recovery, in a sense, of what the Alexandrian Fathers and others had said. So that dialogue's going on, so we've already benefited from it, and I think we will to a much greater degree in the next 25 years.
Oh, I think there's clarity of that has to happen. The eastern part, particularly of Russia and into Asia, that is non-Islamic, that's where an awful lot of things in interaction are going to happen. And if we are going to have an appreciation of the richness of their culture, so much of it is immersed in the richness of their expression of Christianity.
No doubt about it. I always get a kick out of even during the atheistic period in the Soviet Union, when visitors would come, where would they take them to show them their culture? To the Kremlin. You get inside the Kremlin, and what's there but all these magnificent cathedrals, churches. You walk inside of those, and what do you see? The icons and the whole story of the Hebrew Scriptures and the story of Christ and the saints who have lived it out. The whole of Christianity is facing you on a wall there.
In the Kremlin.
Yes, and that's where they would take people. I mean, it's just incredible, the staying power of orthodoxy within the Russian world.
Well, I think that what we've seen within the last 2 years, as there has been that openness in Russia and in Russian-dominated countries, the emergence of people flocking to churches. They may have not been able to go, or it was unpolitical to go, but there was a deep-rooted faith that was part and parcel of their being.
Amazing. One of the Soviet statistics is that in the 70s and 80s, there were 30 million babies baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church. during this time when it was officially proscribed.
I didn't know that.
30 million babies. That's the Soviet estimate during that period of time. So what we're saying, Bob, is when we move into the next 25 years, that dialogue is going to be an important one, enriching one, and it's going to have consequences for the questions, I think, of world peace as well as just sort of more churchy matters.
Oh, I think so. And I think it's probably one of the least understood by most Western Christians, and most particularly most Western Catholics.
I think that's true. Now let's take the other great split, which is, of course, the 16th century and more common area, the Protestant Reformation. We associate that with Zwingli and Calvin and Luther and the horrible splits that we know yet today. In the United States, we feel the pressure of that as we live in this pluralistic society, and we've got Catholic young people here who want to marry a Lutheran, and that creates certain problems, and how are they going to raise their children? So it's very real in our own country. And in this case, the council really has sparked great dialogues. In other words, it's not a great mystery in this regard where we're going or what's happening. And we have had these famous bilateral conferences that this document really spawned between Catholics and Lutherans, Catholics, Presbyterians, Catholics, Methodists, Anglicans, and so on. And this is years hammered out. I mean, saying what do we believe on each side? Let's not water it down, and have come to great consensus. I mean, a tremendous amount of unity when you put the right Catholic theologians with the right Lutheran theologians. They come up with great unity. And we really benefit from that now. And that's a matter of sort of letting that filter down, I think, in the next 25 years to the average person, so they appreciate that more. They realize in the mainline Protestant churches the same scriptures are being read on a given day, that they begin to realize more and more that our Protestant friends don't want to really say that Christ is not present in the Eucharist, that they want to affirm some sort of real presence. And so as we begin to learn more about one another, it seems like we, at that doctrinal level, could see how we could come together.
I think we've probably gone through the euphoria of the early days when those things which we were so rigidly determined not to do with our Protestant brothers and sisters, or they with us, and all of a sudden we not only could do them, but were encouraged to do them from the most official levels. There were a lot of things that happened that we hadn't been able to do before, and a lot of relaxation of the non-essentials that seemed to separate us. Now we're down to the tough part, though, where we're really, as you say, working on and hammering out. And that part on the theologians level and the official levels, that seems to be going rather well, at least from what I read. It's the latter part that you spoke of, the allowing that to filter down in some meaningful fashion to the people who...
And I think the operative word for me is meaningful, because and effective, because we have had a practical ecumenism in the United States all along. We've lived in a pluralistic country. True, we Catholics have had to deal with the nativist prejudice and have felt a need often to work our way into the mainstream, but by and large we have done that now, and we have rubbed shoulders with people of varying backgrounds. We work together on civic projects, we've been at work together, we've dialogued, played golf with them, and so on. It's been, a marvelous open experience. So there's a tolerance built into the American psyche on these religious matters. What it seems as though, during the week we work well together. Sundays we go in different directions, and we haven't quite figured out what to do with that yet. I think, my mentor Karl Rahner claims that in principle all of the major differences between the mainline churches and the Catholic Church are in principle solved. The theologians have done their work. Now it's up to the leaders in the church to accept the results of this and to find ways to institutionalize their findings.
And that's going to be the work of the next 25 years.
Yeah, there's your problem. In other words, if you look at it at a three-tiered level, the level of the average Christian person in the United States, the level of the theologians, and the level of the leaders, bishops, popes, and so on, the group that is most questionable on this is the leadership, it seems to me. The theologians have solved most of the problems. Lay people, I think, are pretty open to this in the United States, by and large, but the leaders have not figured out yet how to institutionalize this unity.
Let me ask you a question, Jim.
Yeah.
Is that one-sided, or is it multifaceted?
In terms of leadership?
Level? Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. I think if you look, for example, at the Anglican world, where this has perhaps moved further forward than any other place, I think you get resistances on both sides. You clearly get it on the Roman Catholic side.
Yes.
In the Vatican, and to what degree that holds for the Pope, I'm really not all that sure, except you would think he would be guiding their receptivity here. I think at least in the past, among Anglican leaders, the impression has been that they have been more open to the institutional framework, finding an institutional framework for coming together. So, I mean, I think you'd have to look at each individual body. For example, if you take Missouri Synod Lutherans, leadership level, you're going to find a lot of people not interested in finding a way to have a federated Christian unity. You take a lot of Southern Baptists, you're not going to find that. Take more liberal Presbyterians, and I think you will find a greater openness. So I suppose it's a mixed bag, and you have to look at each of the leadership groups. But the fact is we haven't achieved this in the first 25 years after the Council, and at that institutional level. In the next 25, we really have our work cut out for us, it seems to me.
I think and it's going to be hard work. It's going to be hard work on the part. I think you may be a bit more optimistic in terms of the people's openness and receptivity than I am. I think there are certain levels where it's very acceptable. There's still some of that cultural heritage of, I'm not going to give this up.
Yeah. Let me see. The answer to that, it seems to me, is what shape the unity takes. Yeah. Now, again, I'm influenced by Rahner, and his Rahner's idea is that in the unified church, you have like a federation of Christian churches, and nobody gives up their heritage. I mean, you still have a Lutheran ritual. You still have a Lutheran way of doing things, a tradition, just like we already have in the Catholic Church Eastern Uniate churches that have their own discipline, their own liturgy, their own canon law, even the right to select their own bishops, so that you already have that in place. And so Rahner's idea is, well, you just extend it. We already got all those Eastern Uniates. Now let's just have a Lutheran group like that, or a Presbyterian group like that. And all you need, of course, is to find a way to present the Petrine office, the role of Peter, that will assure them of maintaining that kind of traditional autonomy, that heritage will not be taken away from them. And then Rahner's got other ways that you're going to solve it, gradually through ordinations, where you have all the different bishops from the different groupings together, and over a period of years that problem gets solved. I mean, he's got ways of working this all out, but I'm just saying, if you start out saying that the people in the next 25 years you're going to lose something, you've got to give up your Presbyterianism or give up your Catholicism or the way you do liturgy and so on, it'll never work.
You're right.
You have to guarantee that tradition is not lost and that you continue to live in it.
But I think that for the vast majority of people who have not been involved in the actual dialogues on the higher levels, that it is that model that is lurking in the back of their heads, that I'm going to have to give up something of mine, or I may have to give up something of mine, and I'm not anxious to do that. If this kind of model that Rahner is proposing, and the many others are echoing, could be clearer, I think we wouldn't be so much afraid.
Maybe part of the task the next 25 years is to make that clearer to the average person in the pew, building on your perception of the situation. And I must say, after you say it, I think you're right. I mean, I think you're on target. After I hear the way you articulate it, I believe that is there, and that we do need to attend to that. And that would be part of the leadership task, to try to move people to sense the way it could happen without diminishing one's distinctive relationship to the Christian tradition. Yeah. I think it could be done. I think that, too, to take up a point you made before, linking it with Yves Congar, he said that what we've lost today is ecumenical passion.
Yes.
We had passion in the past. It was exciting. It was fun to realize that we held things in common, or to go to one another's services, or to have dialogue, living room dialogues. It was wonderful. That's all past now, and the passion is out of it. Somehow we have to reinstitute that passion, because the Second Vatican Council was on target again when it says this is sinful, this is not right. That we are
it is
not
a disgrace.
United. Yeah,
exactly.
It's a scandal, and it makes us less effective in our mission to the world, to try to create peace and justice in the world. So we must overcome that in some way.
Well, I think I'd like to offer just a small corrective thing from a rather parochial point of view, that the zeal and the passion may not be as evident in terms of enthusiasm because of the newness, but I still think there are an enormous amount of activities going on that are interfaith, that are making an impact on the Christian community at large and the larger community.
Well, that could well be. I mean, we need to build on that, I think. Bob, there's another element I want to get in here quickly with very little time, and that is the dialogue needed with the evangelical world. The evangelicals are spreading throughout the world. Guatemala is now over 50% evangelical. Latin American countries, traditionally Catholic, are moving to becoming evangelical. We have a fundamentalist movement in Iran with a great likelihood of spreading. Somehow, we need to promote dialogue with these groups, and we haven't done well at all with this in the past. I mean, it's hard to find evangelicals who are really all that interested in it, and we seem to have far less common ground with them than the mainline Protestant churches.
Well, I think you're right on target, that the evangelical movement, or the fundamentalist movement, if that's perhaps even a broader but accurate term, that needs to be entered into with a great deal of energy on all of our parts.
But it's hard, isn't it? I mean,
if only one person wants to talk, sometimes it's difficult.
Yeah, and we really have an obligation to find our bridges to those communities, and hopefully, as the next 25 years goes on, they become more open to the dialogue, and we become more skilled at figuring out how to promote it. I mean, that's one thing that I would hope would happen. Well, Bob, there's so much more we could talk about in terms of this ecumenism, and I feel we just scratched the surface. But the point is, the Second Vatican Council produced a document, one of 16, on ecumenism. It's open and calls for a change of heart, conversion within. And if we're able to do that, we will probably find our ways to promote dialogue, both with other Christians and with other religious groupings, and then we'll find our way to institutionalize it eventually. And as we look ahead, we want to really carry that spirit of the document, that it is fidelity of Christ that needs to guide us.